Você já sentiu, lá no fundo, que nasceu para algo maior, mas o mundo insiste em te manter escondido? Se essa pergunta ecoa dentro de você, então este vídeo é para você. Antes de mergulhar nessa jornada com Yoshitsune, curta o vídeo e inscreva-se no canal Sabedoria Samurai, a voz de Yoshitsune. Aqui, cada lição ancestral é uma lâmina afiada para sua vida moderna. Imagine crescer com a sensação de que carrega um destino grandioso, mas ser forçado a viver nas sombras. Foi assim que começou a história de Minamoto no Yoshitsune. Você, como ele, talvez tenha sido colocado à margem, não por falta de potencial, mas por circunstâncias que pareciam fora do seu controle. Yoshitsune era apenas uma criança quando seu clã foi derrotado. Seu pai foi executado, seus irmãos exilados, e ele enviado a um templo nas montanhas, longe dos campos de batalha, onde seu nome um dia ecoaria. Mas o que você faz quando o mundo tenta te apagar? Yoshitsune não se resignou. Ele não aceitou o silêncio como destino. Enquanto o mundo o esquecia, ele treinava, em segredo, em silêncio, em disciplina. Ele moldava sua mente como uma lâmina, afiava seu corpo como um arco retrasado. Você também pode estar vivendo esse momento agora, um tempo em que ninguém vê o que você está construindo. Mas é nesse silêncio que nascem os guerreiros mais perigosos. É na invisibilidade que se forja a verdadeira força. Dizem que Yoshitsune foi treinado por Tengus, menos criaturas míticas das florestas japonesas, mestres das artes marciais e da estratégia. Lenda ou não, essa história revela algo profundo. Quando você se dedica com intensidade, até os deuses parecem conspirar a seu favor. Você não precisa de plateia para se tornar grandioso. Precisa de propósito do constância. Digo, para continuar mesmo quando ninguém está olhando. A lição é clara. Quando o mundo tenta te apagar, é aí que você deve acender sua chama. Não espere ser reconhecido para começar. Comece e deixe que o mundo se pergunte de onde você veio quando finalmente aparecer. Yoshitsune não nasceu herói. El se tornou no silêncio, na sombra, na solidão. E você, o que está fazendo? Com o tempo em que ninguém te vê, talvez hoje você esteja no seu próprio templo escondido, longe dos holofotes, longe das batalhas que sente que deveria estar lutando. Mas lembre-se, o tempo da preparação é sagrado. É nele que você constrói a versão de si mesmo que o mundo não poderá ignorar. Agora, pare por um instante e reflita. Você está esperando ser visto para começar? Ou está se preparando para ser impossível de ignorar? Porque a pergunta que fica é: o que acontece quando você finalmente sai das sombras? Você está pronto para enfrentar o impossível com ousadia? Not that impulsive, blind boldness that ignores fear, but the conscious kind, the one that faces the impossible head-on, fully aware of the risks, because that's exactly what Yoshitsune did. And it's exactly what you can do too. After years in exile, Yoshitsune joined his brother Yoritomo in the Genpei War, a conflict that would decide the fate of Japan. He wasn't the oldest commander, nor the most experienced. He was young, underestimated, seen by many as merely a symbol, not a strategist. But do you know what he did? He didn't wait for the world to recognize him. He acted with intelligence, with courage, with boldness. At the Battle of Ichi-no-Tani, faced an entrenched enemy protected by steep, seemingly inaccessible cliffs. The generals said attacking from there would be suicide. But Yoshitsune saw what no one else could, an opportunity where everyone else saw an obstacle. He led his cavalry down an almost vertical descent, completely surprising the enemy forces. The impossible became real because he dared to try, and you, How many times have you found yourself standing before a cliff? A challenge that seemed insurmountable. Maybe it's a project no one believes you can finish. A dream that feels too big for where you are right now. Or even a life change that demands more courage than you think you have. But here's the truth. You don't need to wait until you're ready. You need to be willing. Yoshitsune's boldness didn't come from the absence of fear. It came from the decision to act in spite of it. He knew he could fail, but he also knew that not trying would be the real failure. And that's the mindset you need to cultivate, because fear will always be there. But courage is the choice to move forward anyway. Here's a curious detail. Records say that Yoshitsune and his men descended the cliff with such precision that they seemed to be part of the mountain itself, as if nature accepted them, as if the impossible recognized them as worthy. That's not just history, it's a symbol. When you act with strategic courage, the world bends to your determination. So reflect, what is your cliff today? What have you been avoiding because it seems impossible? And what if, like Yoshitsune, you found a way to descend, not because it's easy, but because it's necessary? Because when you dare to shine, when you begin to win, to conquer, to stand out, a new question arises. What happens when your light begins to shine brighter than the others? Have you ever been betrayed by someone who was supposed to support you? Not by a declared enemy, but by someone who walked beside you, someone you trusted, someone who should have celebrated your victories, but instead saw them as threats. If that's ever happened to you, then you know the silent pain Yoshitsune carried, the kind that doesn't come from a sword, but from broken trust. After leading the Minamoto to victory over the Taira in the Genpei War, Yoshitsune became a national hero. He was the one who risked everything, who won impossible battles, who secured the rise of his clan. But ironically, it was that very light that awakened the shadow in his brother Yoritomo's heart. The same brother he had helped bring to power. The same brother who now saw his glory as a threat, and you. Have you ever felt that your light made others uncomfortable? That your competence, your courage, your dedication, instead of being recognized, were met with suspicion by those who should have supported you? Yoshitsune didn't respond with hatred. He didn't stoop to revenge. Even when the emperor honored him with titles and recognition, and Yoritomo stripped them away out of jealousy, Yoshitsune held on to his honor. He could have rebelled. He could have used his fame to rally allies and start a civil war. But he didn't. He chose integrity. He chose dignity. He chose to be greater than the betrayal. And here lies the lesson for you. Your integrity is your strongest armor, especially when the blow comes from someone close. Because in the end, what defines your greatness is not how you act when you're celebrated, but how you carry yourself when you're wronged. Here's a curious detail. Even while being hunted, Yoshitsune remained beloved by the people. His image became a symbol of loyalty and nobility. In contrast, Yoritomo, despite founding the shogunate, is remembered with coldness and distrust. History doesn't forget those who betray, but it immortalizes those who remain true to themselves. So reflect when you are betrayed, and at some point you will be. What will protect you won't be strength or retaliation. It will be your integrity, your ability to keep your head high when everything around you tries to bring you down. Because true strength isn't in striking back. It's in standing tall, in moving forward with honor, in not letting someone else's bitterness poison your essence. But what about when the world falls apart? When everything you've built begins to crumble at the hands of someone you trusted? How do you stay standing? Can you stay calm when everything around you collapses? Not when things are just difficult, but when they're falling apart. When your certainties dissolve, your allies vanish, and the ground beneath your feet begins to give way. That's when true strength is revealed, and that's when Yoshitsune showed who he really was. Hunted by his own brother, betrayed by the very clan he helped elevate, Yoshitsune watched his allies fall one by one, exiled in distant lands, with each day bringing the threat of capture. He didn't give in to despair. Maybe you've lived something similar. Not with swords and armies, but with losses, ruptures, pressures coming from all sides. And like him, you had to choose. Surrender to chaos, or keep your mind steady. Yoshitsune chose serenity. Even knowing the end was near, he didn't let anger or haste consume him. He moved forward with dignity, with focus, with a calm that wasn't passivity, it was clarity. Because when everything around you shakes, what holds you up isn't what's outside, it's what's within. And perhaps the most powerful reflection of that strength was Benkei, his most loyal companion. When the enemy finally surrounded Yoshitsune, Benkei stood on the bridge alone, facing dozens of warriors. He fought to the very end. And when his body finally stopped, he remained standing, dead but upright. The enemies only realized he had fallen when they approached. That's how much strength Yoshitsune inspired. That scene isn't just a historical curiosity, it's a symbol. Because when you live with integrity, with courage, with serenity in the face of chaos, you inspire others to do the same. You become a pillar not just for yourself, but for those who walk beside you. The lesson is clear. True strength isn't in shouting louder. It's not in rushing to act. It's in keeping your mind steady when everything around you tries to shake you. It's in taking a deep breath when the world tries to suffocate you. It's in taking a conscious step when everything in you wants to run. And now, you need to ask yourself, when everything falls apart, what remains in you? What anchors you? What guides you? Because maybe what seems like the end isn't the end. Maybe it's the beginning of something you just can't see yet. And if that's the case, the question that remains is the end really the end? Or is it simply the moment when you discover your deeper strength? Do you understand that your legacy is greater than your life? That's a question few people ask themselves, and even fewer have the courage to answer with action. But Yoshi did, not with words, but with the way he lived, and the impact he left behind. Yes, he died young, but his story has echoed through centuries, and today, here you are, listening to it. That alone says everything. You might be living in a moment where everything feels urgent, immediate, consumed by the now. But pause and ask yourself, what are you building that will remain when you're no longer here? Because the truth is, life passes, but what you do with it, that can echo forever. Yoshitsune never had the chance to grow old. He didn't live to see Japan at peace, but he had something even more powerful. He lived with courage, with truth, with purpose, and because of that, even after his death, he became a symbol of honor, bravery, and loyalty. He didn't need to tell his story. The world told it for him. And here's the lesson for you. Live in a way that your story inspires, even when you can no longer tell it. It's not about fame, it's about impact, about leaving marks, not just memories, about being remembered not for what you had, but for who you were. Curiously, there are legends that say Yoshitsune didn't die, that he fled to Mongolia, crossed continents, and became Genghis Khan. Historically unlikely, perhaps, but think about what that legend reveals. A collective desire that someone like Yoshitsune couldn't simply vanish, that his flame was too powerful to be extinguished, that he had to continue somehow, somewhere. And you? What are you leaving behind? What are you building that will outlast the moment? Because legacy isn't something you leave at the end. It's something you build every day through your choices, your actions, your courage. You might think it's too early to worry about that, but legacy doesn't wait. It begins now in how you treat people, in the effort you put into what you do, in the integrity with which you live. And if you start living with that awareness, everything changes. Because every step you take gains weight. Every gesture, meaning. So reflect. What if your story is still being written? What if the most important chapter is yet to come? Are you living in a way that deserves to be remembered, or just trying to survive the day? The answer is in your hands, and time has already started counting. Are you willing to be remembered not for perfection, but for courage? That's a question that demands more than a quick answer. It requires a deep dive into who you are and who you're trying to become. Because, maybe, without realizing it, you've been pressuring yourself too much, trying to always get it right, avoiding failure, waiting for the ideal moment, the ideal version, the ideal performance. But Yoshitsune teaches us something else, that courage doesn't require perfection, it requires presence. He wasn't a perfect man. He was impulsive, yes, defiant, sometimes reckless. He made decisions that defied orders, challenged structures, and put him at risk. But he never backed down, never hid, never stopped being who he was. And that's why he's remembered. Not for always winning, but for always facing what came. You don't need to be flawless either. You need to be authentic. You need to be brave. You need to be you, with your flaws, your doubts, your stumbles, and still with the steadiness of someone who keeps going. Because the world doesn't need more perfection. It needs more truth. In Kabuki theater, Yoshitsune is portrayed as the ultimate tragic hero, not as the invincible one, but as the one who persists, the one who suffers but doesn't surrender, the one who falls but doesn't fade. That image isn't a lament, it's a celebration, because there's something deeply inspiring about someone who, even in defeat, remains whole inside. And you, are you willing to be remembered not for doing everything right, but for never giving up on being who you are? Are you ready to accept that your greatest strength might not lie in the perfection of your steps, but in the courage to keep walking? Life will test you. It will put you in situations where you'll make mistakes, fail, feel frustrated. But what will define your story isn't the mistake. It's what you do after it. It's the choice to continue, to rise, to move forward with a steady heart, even when the road feels uncertain. So reflect. What if your greatest victory is simply not giving up? What if in the end, what will inspire others and yourself isn't how often you got it right, but how much courage you had to keep going, even when everything seemed lost? Because maybe, just maybe, true greatness doesn't lie in being perfect, but in being brave enough to be imperfect with dignity. Will you hide, or will you write your own legend? That's the question that echoes when the journey comes to an end, or rather, when it truly begins. Because now, after everything you've lived alongside Yoshitsune, the choice is in your hands. You saw the exiled boy who, even forgotten by the world, trained in silence, believing his moment would come. You learned that boldness isn't the absence of fear, but the decision to act despite it, like in the impossible descent at Ichi-no-Tani. You felt the pain of betrayal when those who should support you become threats. And you understood that your integrity is your strongest armor. You witnessed the serenity of someone who, even surrounded by chaos, kept a steady mind and a clean heart. You reflected on legacy, on living in a way that your story inspires, even when you can no longer tell it. And finally, you understood that it's not perfection that makes you memorable, but the courage to keep being yourself, even when everything seems to want to silence you. Yoshitsune lived as a hunted man, but he died a legend, not because he won every battle, but because he never hid from who he was. He chose courage, he chose truth, he chose action. And because of that, centuries later, you still hear his name, you still learn from him, you still feel inspired. To this day, pilgrims climb the trails of Karama Temple, where Yoshitsune trained as a child. Not just to see the place, but to feel the spirit, to seek, among the trees in silence, the same strength he found, because Yoshi's journey didn't end with his death. It continues. In every person who chooses not to hide, in every soul that chooses to live with courage. And now, it's your turn. You can keep waiting for the right moment. Keep trying to please, to fit in, to stay hidden. Or you can decide that your life deserves to be lived with truth, with boldness, with purpose. You can choose to write your own legend, not necessarily with grand feats, but with small acts of daily courage, with the decision not to give up, not to stay silent, not to fade. The sword of courage is in your hands. What will you do with it? If this journey with Yoshitsune touched you in any way, subscribe to the channel Samurai Wisdom, the voice of Yoshitsune. Turn on the notification bell to keep receiving reflections like this one. Share in the comments which lesson resonated with you the most, or send this video to someone who might need the strength to keep going. Because sometimes all someone needs is a story like this, to remember they can still fight. You don't need to be perfect. You just need to be true. And that is already the beginning of your legend.